A Bundt pan is bakeware that's designed differently from the regular cake pans or bakeware. These different designs make it imperative that one learns how to use a Bundt pan. Bundt pans are usually designed with a hollow in the middle and grooves on the sides, and they are deeper than regular cake pans. The most common sizes are 10 and 12 inches wide and 5 inches deep, and they are most commonly made with cast aluminum. Another fun fact is that the most common shape is round, although many manufacturers are exploring other shapes as well as materials. And finally, Bundt pans are measured by their baking capacity in cups, for example, a 6-cup, 9-cup or 10-cup Bundt pan. Why learn how to use a Bundt pan? One might wonder why the fuss about Bundt pans. There are several reasons why it is important to learn how to use a Bundt pan. We'll discuss some of them as we go on. Bundt pans come in handy for baking thick, moist recipes that require longer baking time. The hollow in the middle of the pan allows for even heat distribution and baking, while the grooves on the sides give the cake a distinct shape and design. Another important fact to note is that it is best to use a Bundt pan for a recipe that calls for it. While it is true that you can use a regular cake pan to bake a Bundt cake, the result would not be the same. The surface of cakes baked in Bundt pans is usually crustier than those baked in regular cake pans. These crusty exteriors also provide the right base for recipes that require heavy decoration. However, most Bundt cakes already look pretty without decoration. By the way, a Bundt cake is a cake baked in a Bundt pan, not necessarily a particular recipe. In summary, it is safe to say that knowing how to use a Bundt pan helps to broaden your baking horizon. How to use a Bundt pan, the basics. As you set out to learn how to use a Bundt pan, there are some basic things you need to know. They are important facts to know before you attempt your first Bundt cake, and they include the following. Recipe size versus capacity of the pan. Most typical cake recipes would require 2 9-inch round cake pans or 3 8-inch. This is about 6 cups of cake batter. Most Bundt pans have the capacity for 6 cups of batter. Like we mentioned earlier, most Bundt pans are between 10 and 12 inches around and 5 inches high. This translates to a 10 to 12 cup capacity. But due to the fact that there are myriads of designs made by different manufacturers, these dimensions and capacity ratio might not be spot on. Following from the above, there is a simple method of determining the capacity of a Bundt pan. Just measure water into the Bundt pan about 3/4 of the pan. The number of cups you get is the true baking capacity of your pan. So if the 3/4 filled Bundt pan yields 6 cups of water, then the baking capacity is 6 cups of batter. This helps you remove the headache of guessing how much batter to put in the Bundt pan. Another reason for this test of pan capacity is that you might want to use a different size of the pan than stated in the recipe. Adjusting recipe to pan size. Most cake recipes would state what type and size of bakeware to use. But there may be times when you do not have the right size as indicated by the recipe. Does this mean that you shouldn't attempt that recipe? Of course not. A rule of thumb that would save you the stress of your batter overflowing is this: ensure that you don't fill the Bundt pan more than 3/4 full. No matter how much cake recipe you have left, do not exceed the 3/4 mark. You can always make cupcakes with the leftover batter or freeze it. That certainly beats wasting the batter in the oven and creating a mess. If you decide to use a bigger pan than recommended in the recipe, then note that the baking time would be shorter. It is safe to start checking your cake 15 minutes earlier than called for in the recipe. Steps. 1. Grease pan thoroughly. This is an essential step in using a Bundt pan. Do not take it lightly, or you'll find that all your hard work would go to waste. Grease the Bundt pan whether it is listed as non-stick or not. You can either use vegetable shortening or butter. Using your hand, brush or wax paper, apply vegetable shortening or butter to every crevice of the pan. Whether you are using vegetable shortening or butter, ensure that no spot is left untouched. Next, sprinkle flour all over the greased pan and then twirl the pan around until there's no shiny spot. This means that every spot has been covered. Finally, turn over the pan in the sink or on a working surface and tap slightly to release excess flour from the pan. Excess flour would produce a buildup of flour on your finished product. In addition also, if you don't grease your pan thoroughly, the cake may stick on the pan and ruin the design of the finished product. 2. Fill the pan properly. When filling your bundt pan, always remember to spoon the batter slowly into the pan. This would prevent the buildup of bubbles in your batter. Also, leave space for the cake to rise. That's why the rule of thumb not to fill a cake pan more than 3/4 full. Most veterans say to leave 1¼ inch between the batter and the top of the cake. I interpret that as 3/4 pan full. Finally, smooth out the batter and tap lightly on the work surface 3 times. This would further dislodge any air bubbles that formed. 3. Follow baking and cooling instructions. This step is also vital to get the desired result. After baking the cake, use a butter knife or plastic spatula to loosen the cake around the edges. Most recipes would require between 10 to 20 minutes of cooling time in the pan before removing the cake. This time allows the cake to firm up so that when you invert to remove, it wouldn't break. Beware, however, of leaving the cake too long in the pan. If you do, the cake will become damp and stick back to the pan. 4. Removing cake from a bundt pan. After you have allowed the cake to cool for as long as recommended by the recipe, turn it over on a cooling rack. Then tap the pan several times to dislodge it. Some people like to invert their cakes on a cooling rack to continue cooling before they remove it. If you want to do this, remember to allow the cake to sit upright for a minimum of 5 minutes before inverting the pan onto a cooling rack. Then when the cooling time is done, lift off the pan, by then it would come off easily from the cake. If not, give the pan a few taps. Expert tips. The great thing about the world becoming a global village is that you get to learn from people all over the world. To this end, we have gathered tips and advice from veteran bakers and homemakers. Here are some of the tips from these experts who have learned how to use bundt pans. 1. Get the right batter to pan ratio. Ensure that your pan is only 2/3 full, no more than 3/4 at the most. This depends on the recipe though. With some recipes, any more than 2/3 would result in a cake that's rounded at the top. This means that the cake wouldn't sit flush on a platter, although you can remedy this by leveling the cake. Additionally, the cake may be either over or under baked if you do not follow the right batter to pan ratio. 2. Use the right material. It is true that there are many innovative materials for bundt pans these days. But the truth of the matter is that the best material for bundt pans is cast aluminum. Cast aluminum conducts heat evenly than any other material, and this is key for a bundt pan. Even in using a metal bundt pan, it is better to use lighter shades of pans that are non-stick. This is very important because of the intricate design of a bundt pan. It is very easy for your cake to fall apart if it sticks to the pan. And more disastrous would it be if the cake doesn't bake evenly. 3. Avoid baking spray. Veterans advise that using a baking spray for bundt pans is not the best for your baked goods. It has been discovered that as a cake bakes and rises, it holds onto the edges of the baking pan to be stable. This, therefore, means that if your bakeware is slippery, the cake would not rise well. Hence the use of vegetable shortening or butter to grease and then dust off with flour. This ensures that you have a non-stick but also a non-slippery baking surface. However, you can use the baking spray if you are confident that it has flour. 4. Set your pan on a baking sheet. Due to the intricate shape and designs of bundt pans, it may be a little bit cumbersome to handle. Thankfully, some designs have handles for ease of transfer to and fro the oven. But in the case where yours doesn't, it is best to place the bundt pan on a baking sheet tray. This would not only make it easier to handle but would also catch any spills in case you didn't follow our advice on the proper filling of the pan. 5. Allow the cake to cool appropriately. Some people make the mistake of assuming that all is well because they prepared their baking pans properly. Therefore, for that reason they can remove the cake from the pan immediately it comes out of the oven. That's not altogether true, especially for bundt pans. You must without fail leave your cake to cool for some minutes in the pan. This would save you the heartbreak of ruining all your hard work. The cake needs to firm up so that the design would remain intact when you bring it out of the pan. 6. Right recipes. It is pertinent that you have the right bundt cake recipe. The right recipe is one that is super moist because a high percentage of the cake's exterior would be exposed to a baking temperature that's higher than normal. This is because of the unique shape of a bundt pan. 7. Care and maintenance. A major part of knowing how to use a bundt pan is knowing how to wash it. Bundt pans are best washed by hand. We know that many are advertised as dishwasher safe, but as with all premium quality bakeware, they are best washed by hand. The second point is storage. Always allow your bundt pan to dry very well before you store it. This would prevent rusting, peradventure you start out with a low quality pan. Another thing you have to be careful about when storing your bundt pan is ensuring that they are well kept to avoid distorting the shape. You cannot just throw one into the other without considering their nesting ability, which is obviously non-existent. Bundt pans are best stored separately and face down. That way, you are assured that nothing would fall into the pan to distort the shape. Thirdly, do not use sharp objects on your bundt pan. In fact, this rule applies to all your bakeware and nonstick kitchenwares. Use a butter knife or plastic, silicone spatula when you want to loosen the edges of your bundt cake. This would prolong the durability of your pan. Recipe: Lemon Bliss bundt cake. Ingredients: to make the cake you'll need the following: 1 cup, 227 grams, 8 ounces or 2 sticks butter. 2 cups, 454 grams or 8 ounces sugar. 1 teaspoon salt. If you are using salted butter, use 3/4 teaspoon. 4 eggs. 2 teaspoons baking powder. 3 cups, 360 grams or 12.6 ounces flour. 1 cup, 235 milliliters or 8 fluid ounces whole milk. 2 medium lemons rind, finely grated. To make the glaze you'll need the following: 1/3 cup, 79 milliliters or 2.7 fluid ounces fresh lemon juice. 3/4 cup, 170 grams or 6 ounces sugar. Instructions for preparation and baking. 1. Properly grease and flour a 10 to 12 cup bundt pan and set aside. 2. Preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. 3. Place the butter, sugar and salt in a mixing bowl and mix until light and fluffy. 4. Add the eggs one by one and beat well with each addition. Remember to scrape the sides and base of your bowl so that all the ingredients would be well combined. 5. Combine the flour and baking powder in a bowl and set aside, then measure out the milk. 6. Start by mixing 1/3 of the flour into the butter and egg mixture and alternate with the milk in 3 parts. You would start with the flour and end with the flour. 7. Gently stir in the lemon rind. Ensure that you do not overmix the batter. 8. Spoon batter into the bundt pan as prescribed and place in the oven. 9. Bake for 45 minutes to an hour or until a cake tester inserted into the middle of the cake comes out clean. If you are using a dark pan, the cake would bake faster, so you have to start checking it at the 40 minutes mark. Make the glaze. Combine the lemon juice and sugar in a saucepan and set over medium heat. Do not allow the lemon juice to boil. Just let it warm up a little while the sugar dissolves. You can also do this in a microwave, but be careful that the lemon juice doesn't become too hot. Set aside to cool. Remove the cake from the pan and glaze 1. When your cake is done, remove it from the oven. Run a butter knife or rubber spatula around the edges of the pan and let it sit for about 5 minutes. 2. Next, invert the pan onto a cooling rack and leave it like that for another 5 minutes. 3. Then tap the pan slightly and attempt to lift it off the cake. If it comes off, good, but if you feel any resistance, leave the pan for another 5 minutes before another attempt. 4. Brush the glaze over the cake, allowing each coating to sink in before adding the next one. Apply until you use up all the glaze. 5. Allow your cake to cool completely before frosting if you choose to do so. You can frost this cake with any icing of your choice. Conclusion. There are many uses to which you can put a Bundt pan apart from baking cakes. The beautiful thing about Bundt pans is that the end product always looks more like the effort you put in. That's why it's really worth your while to know how to use a Bundt pan. Go ahead and experiment with all other kinds of meals and baked goods. Hope you enjoyed this video? Subscribe to our channel and turn the notification on, so that you will know once we post a new video. Do not forget to visit our site, www.cakedecorationproducts.com, for more cake content like this.